Everyone, I wanted to talk about what we're going to be looking at this week. We've got several lectures on more introductory material, and really the conversation is about what is law. So we all have these ideas of what it is, what it means. And so I want you to think for a second as we approach this of when you think about the term law, what do you think about? Do you think about rules? Do you think about justice systems? Do you think about, the law being like police? What is it that comes to mind first? And, give that one second. I'm going to ask you a few different questions. I realize this is a kind of conversation that works really well in person, so we're going to try to do best we can here online. So think about what the law, what comes to mind first. Now, from there, I want you to think about, we have this preconceived idea of the law. Where does the law come from? So where does this thing that we're talking about originate, right? I mean, we just don't, you are born into a world where there are laws, and so you don't really have choice unless you decide you're going to leave the country and choose another country. In some degree, you have a choice to choose states, right? I mean, there are certainly people who move to Colorado because Colorado has very liberal drug use laws. There are people who have moved to, we're going to talk about this in a later class, who have moved to, Oregon or Washington for some end-of-life laws. So you have a little bit of choice, but for the most part you don't. You don't get to choose, and you probably don't make a choice on where you live because of the speed limit and so where does it come from? And it's maybe not a question you've ever thought about too much before. So just think for a second. What are some places where law originates? So I'm going to list a few. You probably have a couple that have come to mind right away. One that we're seeing right now is executive orders. Right, President Trump has given executive orders, and so the president has powers given to him by the Constitution that give him the ability, he or she, the ability to enact and enforce certain laws. So certainly there is some laws can be created through executive order, but the ability to do that is in and of itself a law, and that comes from the Constitution. And so the Constitution is sort of our source, our original document, right? That it's written very broadly. It's a very short constitution, and one of the reasons that the Supreme Court has been active for so many years in very hotly contested cases is that the Constitution is silent, if you will, as to a lot of matters. It says that you have the right to life, liberty. What does that mean? What does the right to life mean? Does that extend to unborn children? That's one of the questions that the court has debated and will continue to debate. Is what is the constitutional interpretation of the right to life? Okay, so we have a lot of this originates from the Constitution. And then, the Constitution gives powers to the executive branch. It also gives powers to the legislative branch to enact law. So pretty much, most of the law that we talk about, what is the standard for murder? We're going to get to this in a couple classes here. What's the standard for what rises to murder, and how long is someone sentenced? Well, that is something that your state legislators would be creating, right? They create that law. The Constitution gives them the ability to choose those things. And so one of the ways that if you disagree with what President Trump is doing with his executive power laws is that your legislative branch could come in and can write a new law that, no pun intended, trumps the executive branch. So there is that ability to enact law, to replace law. And then we have a third area where law originates, and that's the judicial branch and what we call common law. We're going to be talking about common law today. And so that's judge-made law, that judges are making law over time, that they are trying to interpret law, and that they, the Supreme Court interprets it. Well, you can come in and you can override that again with the legislative branch, but judges are constantly interpreting, enforcing, and making law. So those are three. Now we have sort of some sub areas. We have administrative law, where different organizations are given the ability. So not necessarily by an elected slate of officer. So for instance, the FAA regulates the airline industry, and it can create laws about drones and about when and where you can fly them, and it can create laws about cell phones on planes. TSA, Homeland Security has the ability to change and modify and create law related to what's in security and what you can bring through and how people pass through airport security. So we have these portions of the government that are given the ability to create law. Now, there's some general buckets on where does law come from. I also want you to think about, why does law exist? What's its purpose? What is the purpose of law? So give that a thought. Like, what comes to mind? What does it do? Right? I think for the most part, people come with a first answer of, well, it's rules, because we think about the speed limits and the things you can't do. Right? So, but there's a reason for that, and it's that law, it exists to create a more efficiently functioning society, right? That we think the speed limit should be such that even though you could drive faster and perhaps it'd be safe to drive faster, we know that there are speed points on roads where accidents go up, and so it is in the greater good, if you will, of society to have a speed limit, a certain speed limit on a road or an interstate, and not, so yes, it's a rule, but there's this sort of greater purpose that it's serving for society. So an orderly society, really, good way to think about this is in the business context. We have different rules on ethics, misappropriation of business, the stock market transactions. So we got into this financial meltdown is that companies were doing in 2008. Companies were doing illegal investments, and we want to prevent that. So we want an efficient, functioning economic system. I've done a lot of work in Africa, and these are places, Uganda, Rwanda. Rwanda's getting in pretty good shape, but Uganda is an absolute mess in terms of the legal system. Like, they have rules on the books, but they're not enforced, and so really no one pays any attention to the rules, to the laws, and traffic is absolute gridlock. The economic system can't get off the ground because no one wants to invest in companies because there's embezzlement, and you start investing in you hire people and they steal your money, right? And there's not a good mechanism for enforcement, or they steal your products off, out of the trucks, and they sell them on the secondary market. So you really see how, and then in general corruption within the government too. That if you want to award an oil contract, you get these government officials, and their pocketbooks are getting larger because of it. So it really creates an unjust system, and that's why there's a limited economic development, and it just really doesn't function very well. We have law has a peacekeeping purpose. We do have rules and laws in place that the police enforce for peacekeeping reasons. We don't want mass riots all the time. We don't want you to feel like if you go out to go shopping at the grocery store, there's a likelihood of getting robbed or pickpocketed. And if you do, you won't go out and buy things, right? You won't go anywhere. So we do have a peacekeeping purpose. We want to promote, personal freedom. We want to create things like free speech. We have some debates right now about what can you say online, what can media talk about, can you repost fake news, these things. Well, the idea of a robust and First Amendment right to free speech is one of the pillars of the United States vision for a just society. And so, we want to have laws in place that help promote those sort of personal freedoms. We have laws sometimes that promote social justice. There's a lot of debate. Obamacare, for instance, which is on the chopping block, if you will. Is it better to have a state-sponsored health care program that maybe provides access to more people? But at least, in rural parts of Minnesota right now, there are a lot of farmers that are individuals who are self-employed, who are just getting, are paying exorbitant amounts for their health care. So we have that debate. What is social justice, and does the Obamacare law promote social justice? What if it harms one group but helps another? What if it harms rural Minnesotans but helps more people across the U.S.? These are the kind of questions we have to answer. Most of all, what I want you to know and think about is that I think law is this idea of achieving justice. And we really want to think about, in this class, what is a just outcome? So in all the cases you're going to read, keep in mind that there are real people on each side. You might absolutely disagree with one of the sides in the case and say, that's absolutely wrong. Well, there is a real person who has something at stake and is fighting this battle because they believe in their cause. And, you really you want to drill down and think about, okay, can I see it from their perspective and know that these aren't just things that happen? They're real people, and they usually represent larger groups of people and positions. And so our goal with law is to overall achieve justice, a just outcome. And I think, there's something biblical to that too. We talk a lot about, the Bible speaks about justice. And one of our sources for law that we can talk about at Bethel is is biblical law. And does that inform our national law? Should it inform our national law? And we'll dive into some of the debates about Obamacare and freedom of religion as we go in this class, and how law and religion sort of interact and sometimes often bump up against each other. But again, think about justice, and I think you'll have that gut feeling, right, of when you read cases of this is the right thing or this isn't right. I don't wait, even if it's a contract issue or a patent issue where it's not someone's life at stake, there is still money and there is still a right and just outcome. And so we want to, above all, be promoting justice with the law and as our ultimate goal. Okay, so I want to kind of preview some of the cases that we're gonna talk about this week. Pearson versus Post is one of my favorites. I'm going to do a bit of a discussion on Pearson versus Post in the next lecture, but this is one of my favorite law school cases, and why I assigned it is because I just think it's really interesting. It's obviously a different time and different place because you've got these hunting dogs and you've got these people who are out hunting for the fox, and the question in this case is who has the right to the fox, right? The one who's been pursuing it all day, trying to hunt it, or the one who, really stepped in and shot the fox and physically claimed it? Does pursuit matter? And, you might be reading this, you might be like, oh, why are we talking about foxes and hunting dogs? And this is such an old case. It really is. But this is a case that has formed the basis for property law, right? Think about, and we'll probably look at some current events throughout this class on, music, the music industry, for instance, any kind of intellectual property. So we're talking about, in Pearson versus Post, talking about a fox, but a fox isn't that different than the idea of a song. Let's say you had the idea for Mickey Mouse, right? And you had it before Walt Disney, or you had, a lyric to a song and Taylor Swift ripped it off from you. Is the idea that you started pursuing it, or is it the one who recorded it and made it? What point does at what point does property law is it your property? And that's really the question for Pearson versus Post. And again, these are two real people, and you can't help but feel sympathetic for the one who, for Post, who's been pursuing this fox and chasing all day. He put in a lot of effort, even though he didn't get it. He put in the effort. He'd been going after this, whereas Pearson just sort of swept in. But okay, so in this case, we can get to a fairly quick conclusion about who has the rights. I'll let you read it and try to get the answer. It's a little confusing because again, some of the language is rather old in this document. But essentially, what we come down to is that it's too hard to say how much pursuit is necessary, right? We did you saw the fox? Is that enough? You saw the fox and took a step toward it. Is that enough? We really don't have a good way to say what constitutes sufficient pursuit, right? And we're gonna, if we tried to go with pursuit as the mechanism for determining property rights, then we would be asking our courts to adjudicate and make a lot of decisions on what constitutes pursuit. And so it's really easier to this case to just say actual corporal possession, even though Pearson came in and shot the fox. Pearson did come in and shoot the fox. He actually possessed it. And that's easy. That's a bright line rule that we can say, is that that's the point when you possess it, when you actually possess the physical thing. And so, it'd be like saying, well, hey, you drew a mouse 100 years ago. Your great-grandparent drew a mouse, and, well, they had the same idea as Mickey Mouse. They were really in pursuit of the Mickey Mouse thing, and they had these, these drawings of this mouse. And, well, they didn't have the same name, and it didn't quite look the same, but it was in pursuit of the same end goal as Walt Disney. Well, that's not enough. Walt Disney actually created Mickey Mouse, and we need to say, you created Mickey Mouse, that's when it becomes your idea. So you can see how this starts to form the basis. Now, one thing that's interesting in Pearson versus Post, I gave you both the opinion and the dissent. The dissent is the opposing argument, and that when you have Supreme Court cases, and this is the Supreme Court of the state of New York, when you have cases at that level, you usually have you have judges that split decision, and they might be looking at something different. So you'll see the dissent, and the dissent means that they did not win; they're just voicing their opinion. And in this case, it's really more about public policy of killing foxes and wanting to encourage killing foxes because they were considered a nuisance animal at the time. So the dissent is not the final word; it is the majority opinion. Now, Pearson versus Post is a fox. I want you to think a little bit about how does this case change when technology changes, for instance. So, or not just technology, but the the medium. So a related case was when they were doing whaling out on the East Coast, and you could pursue a whale and you could shoot it, but they did not at the time have big enough boats to pull the whales back onto the boat. And so it came before the U.S. courts about, so what would happen is people would shoot the whale and then it would float to shore, and someone else would come up and take the whale carcass and all the meat and everything, the blubber, whatever they got out of it, and using the logic of Pearson versus Post, you would say, well, I the beachgoer, have taken actual corporal possession. The hunter, the harpoonist, who has the boat and everything, well, yeah, they couldn't take it up, but they couldn't possess it. So it's who gets it. So the whalers brought this lawsuit, and the courts had to make a change to this law and say that, or not a change to it, but adapt it for this situation, that it's actual corporal possession unless you can't actually corporally possess it. But in a whale, right? You can't haul it onto your boat. So you do as much as you can to actually get actual corporal possession, and then that it becomes sufficient. So for the whaling industry, they allowed harpooning. Now, I also like to ask if there are hunters in my class, and if you've been hunting, you'll know that there are. This is an actual situation. Hunters will shoot an animal, and then that animal does not always die right away. It goes somewhere else. So it'll go off your property. It'll go onto someone else's property. Do you have the rights to go onto that property and take it because you shot it? The answer is typically no. If the animal ends up there, it is it is the right of the person whose land it ended up on. So Pearson versus Post is still very much alive, even in today's hunting, that pursuit is still not merely enough. You actual corporal possession, and if you shoot a deer and the deer wanders onto someone else's property, and they can tell you can't come on to get it, they can actually corporally possess the deer that you shot. So we're also going to talk about what happens when the law gets it wrong, and you have a couple cases. So we don't always get it right. We have bad law. There are questions right now whether Roe versus Wade about abortion could be overturned, and whether the court got that case wrong. We're also going to talk about some other interesting cases in the news, like the McDonald's hot coffee case, and you may have already viewed this video. If you haven't, I want you to think about what you knew about this case, because if you're like me, you had some basis for, you've heard about this case. You knew something about it. You knew that there was a lawsuit, hot coffee was spilled, and there was a lot of money involved. And so think about what you know, what you've heard about it, and then and what you think you know about it, and you're going to watch a movie on it that I think will may change a little bit of that understanding. So that's what we're going to be talking about over the course of this week's lectures. Thanks for watching.